With there being more and more gacha games being created and even more highly anticipated ones, it's hard to gauge whether or not any of these gachas are worth starting or getting into. I'm sure plenty of us would like to introduce our friends to these games, but the new player experience really will depend on the game that you pick. Some games might have a really slow start, and some games might have a basic start, while others might throw you into a loop, giving you more questions than answers. A game that I'm currently going through is PGR, which, it does have one of the starts of all time. Depending on the game that you pick, you might end up finding something really special or end up with something unfortunately disappointing. What you make out of a game is obviously going to depend on the person. My favorite gacha game might be your least favorite and vice versa. So many popular gacha games have been out for over a year now, and there's a lot of catching up to do if you were to start any of these popular games now. Especially given that there's pointless side quests and pointless filler quests. I also think there's an unfortunate reality that people who start a game now are going to feel behind compared to the people who started on day one. This sort of thing makes me wonder if it's even too late to start. And I think that the short answer is no, but the long answer will be it's complicated, and it really does depend on the game. It's undeniable that the longer a game is out, there's going to be more to do, but it is strange to think about all the catch-up work that might need to be done. Super obvious, but the longer you wait to start, the more stuff you're gonna have to do in order to catch up. A game that I started on launch and quit for a few patches was Zenless Zero, which now has become one of my favorite gacha games and isn't really insane with power creep yet. Ignore Miyabi. Besides that, I would say things are pretty chill. However, I'm not quite at the end game. I can't clear every single piece of end game, so maybe I'm completely wrong about all of that and all the power difficulties are just stuff I don't understand yet. However, as a player who's in the mid to late game-esque, I found the game to be straightforward, even though I had so many patches to do to catch up. The story itself was pretty quick, and it felt meaningful to do. I enjoyed it a lot. And all things considered, I'm glad that I went back to this game to play it. Zenless Zero was pretty recent, so what about an older game? A great example of a game that's hard to start is Honkai Impact. I would say that this game is pretty hard to get into because of the overwhelming amounts of currency, power creep, and how often the game will direct you into doing something else. Lots of game modes in this game have reached a status of legacy and where they're not being updated at all. Look at the open world game modes, which all include a short story unrelated to the main plot and are used to further explore lore. Sometimes checking out a game mode will throw you into another story entirely and you're forced to sit through it, which is a bit annoying. While this is fine for endgame players, I guess, new players are really tossed around and have to manually go back to what they were doing before. For me, I have completed the entirety of Part 1 and Part 1.5, but I have not really completed all of Part 2's stuff. I've done a few chapters, but for me, I started a bit late. I started a little over a year ago, and it really was a lot to do and a lot to catch up on and learn about. It also doesn't help that there's a lot of pop-ups that force you into cutscenes, and even though Honkai does get better the more you play it, starting it really was a hassle for me, and I'd imagine it only will get worse. New players might not be aware of how useless many of the old S-ranks units are, basically the equivalent of 5 stars, and as each patch comes out, another unit will become obsolete. That concept alone will be a mess to deal with, as nobody wants to go into a game and find out that their unit is a waste to build. The currency for this game will depend on the shop that you visit, and while Honkai is trying to make newer players have an easier time starting by adding light modes or really autoplay, it's still not an easy game to get into, and it's hard to gauge whether or not the struggle is worth the payoff. That being the story, the combat, and the ranked endgame mode systems. Whether or not the time and learning investment is worth it ultimately will depend on you. Regardless, this game does show that the growing barrier that comes with starting a gacha game. One thing that helps Honkai Impact is that it is a level-based game, so it's easy to consider the game as such, to beat the levels and enjoy the gameplay. So what about one of the open-world games like Wuthering Waves or Genshin Impact? I'll use Genshin as the point of reference since it's been out for years and it is the bigger game of the two. But I'm sure everyone who's watched this video has played Genshin and has a variety of different opinions. This could have been the game that introduced you to gachas and sent you down this rabbit hole, or it could have been the game that you simply couldn't get into, which is fair as well. The game is 5 years old now, with a bunch of regions and areas to explore. There's countless characters to play with and even more side quests to get through, and while this might be the highlight for some people, other people might see this as a chore. Needing to explore so many different areas and so many side quests to do, it might just be a lot for players and it might not be worth starting for them. It really is a lot to do, and it's hard to progress your account. unless you want to spend in countless hours of investment. I've heard a lot of people quitting this game because of burnout, boredom, and the pacing of the story, or lack thereof. And I do think that Wuthering Waves could face a similar problem, as it is also open world, and due to its genre, will require a lot of time to progress and catch up to. Fortunately, Wuthering Waves has made the quality of exploring much easier and generally much more fun, especially with a bunch of tracking and stuff, which is great. But as time goes on, people are going to have to deal with years of catch-up work. So my question to you is, would it be too late to start these games? And to give the most obvious answer, and the lack of payoff for this one, I think it really depends on what you want from the game in the long term. For me, I think that the process of exploring and getting through the early and mid games should be just as important as the end game, and having to start a game with an uncertain payoff, that being the end game, is not going to make it worth starting. However, if the beginning and middle and even end game is fun, then there shouldn't be an issue with worrying about catching up. It really should just be play the funny game and have fun. If you're trudging through a game, you're just not going to have fun even in the end game because the core gameplay is going to be somewhat the same. And I just think that maybe just value your time and don't play that game if you're going to hate it. However, there are some games that really were worth my time and I really did enjoy, such as Zenless Zone Zero, which I did quit in the beginning, but now I'm playing it and I like it and I beat most of the game. I've barely touched the end game, but I still really like the game and I'm having fun with it going at my own pace. With PGR, I've also started playing that, and I'm having fun with it, but I'm not rushing it and worrying about catching up because it's an old game and there's going to be so much to catch up on. It's important that the journey of getting to endgame is just as fun as the endgame itself, because that's really the game. That's what you're doing to play that game. I know that sounds so obvious, but I know people are worried about starting a game too late just because they are going to have to play so much catch-up work. You might really enjoy Genshin Impact or Wuthering Waves, but the amount to put in to work on that game, it's going to be a lot. There's going to be so much stuff to do, and it's going to be impossible to catch up on all of that in a reasonable amount of time. And that's why pacing yourself is going to be important. Time is something that is invaluable, and so is enjoyment. Some of the most exciting moments in a gacha game is the new player experience, at least for me, because everything feels important and your resources are such a valuable point at that time. If you hate turn-based games, then maybe you won't enjoy Honkai Star Rail, but if you want to play an open-world game, and Genshin or Wuthering Waves seems like a game that you would like, then play those games. It's fine. But if you don't find them fun and you're forcing yourself to play them because you've played so much into them, you're just gonna resent the game and burn out and hate it and just quit. If you've enjoyed any of these games, then endgame really isn't the issue. Since you're having fun, experience the game, meaning that starting it was worth it. But maybe there's a game that looks appealing to you and the idea of catching up is a drag. It really will be case by case. At that point, I really think it's better to just give whatever game that seems interesting to you a shot, and if the hook works, then starting it was worth it. If it doesn't work, then you know you gave it a chance and you're not worrying about whether or not you should play this game. I know that this was a little bit of a ramble that didn't have a lot of real point, but I made this video to serve as a motivator for myself to try out lesser known gacha games, especially just ones that I've found to be interesting, but I just couldn't find the reason to start it. I think it's easy for people to get stuck playing one or two gacha games, and that's going to prevent them from starting a game that they might really end up loving. It is also important to know when to quit and how much you're willing to put into these games, which I get is going to be hard to pace yourself on. It's possible to see a game that looks genuinely fun, but there isn't enough time to play that game, especially since you might feel married to an existing game, and now you're not even able to give that game a chance. It also doesn't help that these games are getting consistent updates. It's all a lot, but taking time to try these new games that you know you'll like and not worrying about playing catch-up, I think this is by far the most healthy way to take these gacha games. For me, the game that I wanted to start for the longest time was Punishing Grey Raven because I really like the direction of Wuthering Waves, and while I'm not super sure how long I'll play it for, especially since navigating is a lot harder than I thought it was, but starting older games is hard. With every gacha game being pumped out, I know this dilemma will only get worse. Also, about my last video, I find it pretty funny that I wrote a review for PGR only to find out that it gets better in terms of quality beyond the beginning. which just makes sense due to the game's age and the lack of budget that they had making the game, especially now with Woo-Wah being out that I know it's going to get better. It's just interesting because as newer games come out, there's going to be less barrier of entry and therefore less catching up to do. It's going to be harder to start any other game, especially since our standards of quality will continuously be raised as time goes on, which is a good thing. Play the best product. But it is just interesting. To really summarize everything, just give what you like a chance. Don't be afraid to quit it. Don't be afraid to start things, and if it doesn't work out for you and you don't like the game, fair enough, don't play it. On the topic of not being able to start anything, I wanted to just briefly thank everyone who's been clicking on these videos. Starting the channel alone had many mental obstacles, especially in relationship to learning. I get that it doesn't matter, and I know that they're pretty scuffed videos, but still, thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have a great day.